I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker. Our afternoon keynote is here, Mayor Marty Walsh. Personally, I'm particularly excited to introduce Mayor Walsh. I volunteer for his salary negotiation initiative under the Office of Women's Advancement that he has established, and I'm just thrilled that he's here to speak about the city's efforts in gun violence prevention. So a very quick bio. But born and raised in the neighborhood of Dorchester by immigrant parents, Mayor Walsh was driven to make sure the city of Boston is one where anyone can overcome their challenges and fulfill their dreams. This very much aligns with the mission of CAMTech, that anyone that has an idea can become an innovator and an entrepreneur to make impact. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Marty Walsh.
Thank you, Sandra. And I first want to just say, Joshua, that was incredible. Thank you for sharing your story. I think that anytime that somebody goes through a traumatic experience, talking about it publicly might be difficult for you, but for the rest of the room, it's incredible. And there's somebody in this room that probably needs to hear you speak today about what you experienced, and maybe they haven't themselves, but somebody in their family has. So thank you for your courage in that. And my only advice is day at a time. Just take a day at a time, and incredible story that you told us. So thank you for that. I also want to thank everyone for being here today. I know Commissioner Evans spoke earlier today, so I don't think I can top the Police Commissioner of Boston. He has a way to tell a story that's incredible. So I want to thank the Commissioner. I want to thank Dr. Paul Currier and MGH for being here, Christian Olson and CAMTech for putting today on. The survivors that are here, thank you for being here. The advocates that are here, thank you for being here. All of you in this important conversation, particularly at this moment in time. It's important for us to continue to have good, strong dialogue. I know there were some other speakers earlier. Joseph spoke. I want to thank you and Martin and Jody and all the powerful stories that were told today. I missed them. I apologize, but thank you for sharing. I want to thank, again, CAMTech for hosting this important summit and this hackathon and bringing people together. We have business leaders, tech leaders from different areas, government officials, public health advocates. I know Sheriff Katusha was here earlier today. I serve with him in the House of Representatives. The people in this room that paint a very clear picture about gun violence and both a public safety and a public health issue. As mayor of the city of Boston, when I ran for mayor, I got elected. I've been mayor now 4 years. And one of the things that I didn't realize that would have such a big impact on me is when the phone rings from Commissioner Evans and tell me that there's a shooting in Boston. I get that call a couple times a week, and I also get the call too often, even though when you look at national average, Boston is not a city that has the homicide rates of other places, but I've had too many of them. One is too many. And I've gotten those calls plenty of times, and often the call is like this: young black male, either in a car, young black male walking down the street, ambushed, and killed because of gun violence. And the frustrating part of it is that all of these can be and should be prevented. Because of the access to handguns and the too easy access to handguns. What happened at Pulse, what happened at Parkland, what happened in Newtown, they hit the newspaper, and they hit the CNN, and they hit Fox News, and they hit all the papers as a mass shooting happens. But all across America, we could have a news story every single day of 50 people killed in America, and more than that because of gun violence. And so we have a mass shooting every single day in the United States of America. And there's no question about it in my mind that gun violence is a public health problem, something that we have to deal with it on so many different fronts. It devastates families, and I often say this, that when there's a shooting in our city and a young person gets shot, or anyone gets shot and killed for that matter, two families are devastated. The family who lost a loved one and the family who's about to lose a loved one when the police find out who did the shooting, and that person is taken out of society, put in prison, and they completely lose both of their loved ones when a shooting like that happens. It traumatizes communities. As Joshua talked about, it traumatized the community in Florida. It traumatized communities all across the United States of America. And it certainly shakes a nation. And every time we see it on TV or hear about it, it does shake our community and shakes our nation for a long period of time until we forget about it, and then there's another one that comes right behind it somewhere down the road that puts it back at the front end. And it's amazing what's happening. This is absolutely the conversation that we need to have right here today and tomorrow, and thank you for that. And it's a conversation that we need to continue to have in the United States of America. This conversation about gun violence in our country has gotten louder in light of the recent tragedies, certainly in Parkland with the young people from Parkland. We need to and I hate to say this word, we need to take advantage of this momentum, and we have to continue to move forward, because I don't like saying take advantage of a bad situation, but we have to take advantage of this particular moment in time as we move forward. Our students are passionate. They're incredible. In Boston, I'm sure, I don't know if any students are here from the march, but in Boston, it was based off of what happened in Parkland, Florida, and the kids here were able to turn it around. In Massachusetts, we had kids from all over the Commonwealth, to turn it around into an anti-violence conversation. So they took it from a mass shooting in Florida in the school to a conversation about violence in our streets of Boston, in streets of Springfield, and streets of Worcester and Holyoke and all the other cities where we have issues. And I commend the young people for that. To the brave families of homicides and people across this country for speaking up, we say thank you. We say thank you for doing that. It's so important that you do that, because a lot of times that when you see it, as a mayor, I get to see it up close and personal almost every day, but as an average person, their vision or their understanding of what's happening with violence and gun violence around the country is what they see on TV. They actually don't meet they don't meet the survivors, they don't meet anyone who lost loved ones, they don't get a chance to ask questions, and that's why I think this conversation that you're having today is important, to allow people to ask questions of different survivors, to say exactly what happened. And we know what happened, but I think it's important that we hear it up front and very up close and personal. We all have a role to play in reducing gun violence. There's no question about it. We all have a role to play in reducing gun violence. Some of the stuff I'm about to talk about now, just for a minute, if it's repetitive from the commissioner, I apologize, but I know that I stole his notes. So here in Boston, we're tackling gun issues and gun violence from many different angles. As has been said many, many times, Massachusetts has the lowest death rates in the country. We also have some of the toughest gun laws in the country, and we're proud of that. And I had the opportunity 3 times as a legislator to vote on tough legislation in Massachusetts, gun legislation, as did Sheriff Katusian, who was here earlier today. But I also know that one life lost to a gun in violence is one life too many. And it's not fair that some communities are hit harder than other communities, and that's another issue. I want to thank the Commissioner of Boston Police Department and his command staff for doing important work every single day in our community to make our neighborhood safer. The Boston Police Department officers are dedicated to getting guns off our streets, whether it's through recovering firearms, and I don't know if the Commissioner talked about this, but he texted me 2 days ago to tell me that they went into a house in West Roxbury, and I think they took 14 guns out of the house, and they were all different types of guns. We had a police stop a couple weeks ago that we took an assault rifle out of a gun out of a car, along with other handguns in a car. It was just a random stop. Police officer thought something was funny. He stopped the car, saw something funny in the car, was able to recover all those guns in the car just by doing his job, something that was important. We created a gun buyback program in 2014. People said to me in the papers, editorialized about it, saying, oh, it's foolish, there's no point, you're not going to do anything about it. In the first year, I think we bought back 600 guns. Second year, we bought back 400 guns. Third year wasn't as effective, and now we're looking at how do we relaunch this program again, because the way I feel, if we buy one gun back, that one gun probably would have prevented somebody from being shot with that gun and killed. So that's important for us as we move forward. We're engaging responsible gun owners. There's a lot of conversation about the NRA. Gentlemen talked about the NRA and about, the powerful lobby and how they're working. What we did in Boston was Commissioner Evans and myself send a letter to every gun owner in Boston, just explaining their rights, letting them know if they wanted to get trigger locks, we'd give them trigger locks, how they should store their guns, if a gun was stolen, how they should report the gun, how it would move forward, just basic fundamentals that might not have been explained to the gun purchaser when he or she purchased the gun, and that they understand their rights, what the law is here in Massachusetts, but also what their rights are. And what happens is if we can put a trigger lock on a gun and a gun is stolen out of a home, at least we'll be able to have a little more time to try and find that gun as it moves forward. We're tracing the path of illegal guns, something that's extremely important. Many times when we have shootings in our city, we trace the gun back most times to another state. It also helps Boston lead the way in the efforts of community policing, reaching out to members of the community, explaining their rights, but also talking to people, particularly to the gun buyback program, on how we can encourage parents maybe, or somebody to help us with recovering and getting some of these guns off the street, out of a shoebox under the bed, out of the shoebox on top of a shelf in the bedroom, something that we try to do every day. And I can't underscore how important this is. And If we could have every city and town across the United States of America do what we're doing here in Boston, we would be safer. We'd have a lot more guns off the street. The health and safety of our community depends upon building a strong sense of trust and understanding between our community, between our offices and the community. What does that mean? That means true community policing. There's a big conversation right now in Boston about having body cameras on police officers, and we're heading that way. But body cameras on police officers don't build trust. Body camera on police officers doesn't have that community. The way you build trust is by having our police department talking to young people, in particular young people of color, in our city, to talk about how do we strengthen those relationships, how do we end stereotyping or profiling of young people, and how do we move forward on that. And I'm not saying we're perfect, and we're certainly not the worst, but we have a lot of work to do. But again, it's about having those dialogues and those conversations that are important to us. And I bring that up because a lot of the violence that we experience here in the city of Boston is handgun violence, is gang activity, it's drug activity, it's robbery, things like that. That's the gun activity that we're seeing here in our city. But despite all our efforts, our biggest problem is the flow of illegal guns over the borders of Massachusetts into the city of Boston. In our recent Boston gun crime study, we found that most of the guns recovered by the Boston Police Department between 2007 and 2013 were originally purchased outside of Massachusetts. So here in Boston, we're taking a regional approach. We've held 4 regional gun summits so far with 86 cities and towns in all 6 New England states. What does that mean? That means that we're bringing mayors and police chiefs either to Boston or Providence, Rhode Island. We've had them all over the place, and we're talking about illegal guns flowing into Boston. Obviously, that sparks a conversation in cities and towns around New England saying, well, we have a problem with drugs going up to our area from your neighborhood. So what's happened is we're actually having dialogues and conversations. And there was somebody that was on TV the other day who criticized Boston and Lawrence for drugs going into New Hampshire. And what I was saying, what I thought was kind of ironic, he didn't take the time, or if you look back at the notes from the previous administration, he would have found that one of the things that we're doing is this gun summits, and also it talks about drugs, flowing of drugs up into New Hampshire. So we're working to try and stop that from happening. And we're trying to work better collectively with our police departments across jurisdiction to understand how we can make our neighborhood safer, whether it's Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or Boston, Massachusetts. How do we help both situations in those cities and towns? We're sharing our strategies, building relationships. I'm doing that through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, talking to other mayors in other areas to talk about what we're trying here. Does it work? We won't say, I can't say it completely works until someday at the end of the year I can say we had no homicides in Boston because of guns today. That's my benchmark, and we're not there yet. We've had 15 homicides this year. I think 12 of them were gun related, and that's something that we're still continuing to try and pull those numbers down. We're partnering with researchers and safety advocates like Every Town for Gun Safety, Arms with Ethics, Stop Handgun Violence. I saw John Rosenthal as he's walking out today. We're working with different organizations to try and do whatever we can, any ideas that are given to us, to take those ideas and just try something. There's no harm in trying something. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but just try something different, like you're doing here with the Hack-a-thon. We're rolling out pilot programs and trying to use the newest technology to trace and track guns. So we have a lot that we can say that we're happy with here in the city of Boston, but we also know the larger reality. It doesn't matter how diligent we are here in Boston and Massachusetts. If our federal government doesn't pull their weight, it won't be enough. And we've been talking about this for a long time. Congress needs to take this issue seriously, and not by giving a dramatic speech on the steps of some place where a shooting happened. They need to actually do the job that they were elected to pass legislation that protects the people they represent and protect the people in this country. We need common sense gun reform. Everyone in this room knows what that means. It's something that both sides of the aisle can do and must agree on, and American people certainly do. I had the opportunity, 3 years ago, I was invited to the White House by President Obama. President Obama signed an executive order on national background checks. I was in the White House ballroom, and I was there with, I was the only mayor in the room. There was a couple governors in the room. The leadership of the House was there, and the room was filled with survivors of every shooting that you've seen on TV, including Pulse. And he signed the executive order. Fast forward to January of 2016, President Trump files an executive order banning Muslims from 6 Muslim countries in the United States of America President Trump files an executive order banning or doing something on immigration, that day, President Trump also reversed President Obama's executive order on background checks. Not one person, not one news outlet, not one person talked about it. There was a press conference when President Obama signed it, and when President Trump reversed it, no one talked about it. And all that simply did was a 72-hour background check. And what did that do? That probably saved a few lives. And there was no fanfare, no good discussion. I really haven't heard a national conversation about it since then. But we need our leaders to do more than reverse what's important. So it's important that we moving forward. Speaking of Congress, we're very concerned about in Boston, the concealed carry reciprocity law that's going on right now. I know the commissioner probably touched upon that today. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But what it does, those of you that are new, it will remove the rights of voters in states and localities to enact their own laws. So, for example, Maine has an open conceal law. People in Maine could take their gun that's openly carried, get in their car, come down to Boston, Massachusetts, go to Boylston Street and Copley Square, and walk around and go shopping, and they have the right to do that because the law, Congress gave them that right. So we're working to make sure that that law doesn't pass. It underestimates our efforts here in Boston to bridge the divide between different cultures and views, and we have across the town, city, and state lines issues that we have to deal with. But we also need to start seeing some signs in the right direction. Recently, both academic institutions and private organizations are stepping up to support and fund gun violence research, something that we have to do. Doctors are approaching this topic with their patients as a matter of primary care. The White House clarified language on the Dickey Amendment that may open doors for gun-related research, something that's really important for us to do. But we won't know the real impact until we see money actually start flowing from the CDCs into research. And our signs are hopeful. It's also an encouraging nod that our nation's starting to focus on gun violence as a public health issue, something that we have to do because it's a public health issue right here in the city of Boston. I can speak for New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta, and other cities around America that I know that this is a public health issue. So it's important. So we need to be moving faster. People continue to be affected by gun violence every single day, whether it's a mass shooting, a shooting on our streets, or a self-inflicted violence. We need to look at gun violence in a holistic way and the issues that affect every single community in our country as we continue to move forward here. We also need to start thinking of innovative ways about how we can effectively curb violence. That's why it's important that all of you are here today. I want to thank all of you participating in the Hack-a-thon. Like I said earlier, we have a role to play in reducing gun violence. Technology and innovation can truly make a tremendous difference in this fight. Some of you may find the answers to the next breakthrough to help us advance this work and even save lives. Our future depends upon these smart, creative, and thoughtful approaches to our biggest challenges. We do it in almost every single thing in our city and our state. In Boston, those of you that aren't from Boston, we have world-class institutions. Data and technology are helping us find cures for diseases that we didn't have 15, 20 years ago. So there's no reason why we can't tackle this issue of gun violence the same exact way. So again, I want to thank all of you for holding this summit and this hackathon in our city, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit and your time here in the city. And I know I'm not supposed to take questions, I don't think, but if you want me to answer a couple questions, I will.
I've heard a lot today about gun regulation, but something that I feel like is widely missed, and being from Florida and going to gun shows and being a gun owner and my family being gun owners, ammunition. When do we start to talk about regulating massive amounts of ammunition that people can just walk into, well, at least in Florida, can walk in? What do the laws look like for ammunition here? That's what I'm asking.
I mean, there are strict laws on ammunition, but while I was out in the car waiting, we have, as I talked to you about the gun buyback program we have here in Boston, and John Rosenthal just suggested that we do an ammunition buyback program, and something that he grabbed the police commissioner on this morning, and the commissioner said, that's an interesting idea. I'm going to talk to the mayor about that. And I just grabbed him, unbeknownst that he talked to the commissioner. I said, that sounds like a great idea. I'm going to talk to the commissioner about that. So I'd be willing to bet that we'll probably be one of the first cities in America that is going to have an ammunition buyback program. But that's something that we've talked about a lot in the legislation at the State House. I don't know what the exact rules are, but I know that there is limitations to how much ammunition you can have or how much ammunition you can buy, but there's really not a lot of rules in that. Most of it's focused on guns. Most of it's focused on safety locks. It's not focused on rounds of ammunition. So it's something that we will look at, and something that next time you come back to Boston, we will probably have a buyback program on that. You know? And our rules in Florida, I was in Florida a couple weeks ago when the laws were passed, and I was like, that was huge when the legislature in Florida did some gun reform legislation. I was in Clearwater and I was watching the news. I'm like, oh my God, if that's happening in Florida, we can do a lot in this country. And you know, Massachusetts, like I said, I was a rep for 16 years. I voted on gun rules 3 times, and since I left the legislature, they've done 2 more bills. Bump stocks was the latest, and there's another bill going to the legislature right now that's probably going to be voted on. So there's so much we can do there, but you're right. We have to think about ammunition. Yeah, down the back.
I have a question for you. I kind of look at the polarizing words today that are used, and people kind of the bristles go up on their back. And I think one of them actually is the word gun. And I just wonder if there's a way that either A, we take such a broad thing, such as a handgun, all the way to ARs, et cetera, and start categorizing them. Do you think that there's any worth coming up maybe with a different word, or something that is not so polarizing that we could start the conversation with, or is it worth classifying things? I don't. You know more about this than I do.
I think it depends on where you are. It depends on where you are, really, in the country when you think about it. I mean, generally, I talk about violence as violence. I don't talk about gun violence and stabbing violence and different types of violence. Generally, when we talk about public safety in Boston, we're talking about reducing violence. And one of the things that I say all the time is true, that I'd rather lift somebody up than lock somebody up. And that's what we talk about. You know, the gun comment comes into play in Boston really after a shooting happens. But when we're talking about strategy, the police department's talking about strategy, it's often about how do we reduce violence? How do we get ahead of the game? How do we do more social service programs and get our providers out there and work with our young people and try and target some of the kids that might be suspected that would cause issues or have issues down the road? I think that you know, it's a good point, but I think right now we have to talk about gun violence because there's a whole bunch of different spectrums. I mean, I don't own a gun. I don't have a license to carry. I think people, if they want to be able to carry, get a license, I think they should be able to do that. If they want to walk into a store and buy a gun, they can do that. Should be able to have to go through an intensive background check. You should know who the person is and what the record is and what they're part of. And I think that that's key. And I think that we're not asking for a lot. When I say we, some people in the country are not asking for a lot to do a background check. I mean, when you think about the different shootings that have happened in different areas, there's always a different intent behind the shooting, whether it's mental illness in some cases, or hate, or racism, or bigotry, or whatever it might be. So I think that I know I'm getting off the point of your question. I'll come back to it. But I think that we have to really think about when somebody goes in to buy a gun, we have to do some checks on it, checks and balances. And I think there has to be a registry of guns. If you buy a car, we all buy cars. We can't drive our car without insurance. Oh, we do. We're held responsible for all of it. It's against the law in Massachusetts to drive a car without a license. But yet you don't have to register your gun. You don't have to have a license on your gun. So I just think that we have to look at it differently. But to go back with the buzzwords, I think it depends on what the situation is. It's really hard to not talk about guns. But we shouldn't, as a mayor, I'm not just focused on gun violence, because 2 nights ago somebody was stabbed in front of the Boston Garden and died. He didn't get shot with a gun, he got stabbed. So my concern is, how do you reduce violence in Boston? Part of the violence is gun violence. But I think that it depends on who the person is and how you talk about it. When you talk about school shootings, it's a little different. I mean, you're talking about high-powered rifles that are happening. In Boston, we do have high-powered rifles in the streets, but not to the magnitude. Most of ours are handguns. You know, in the school shootings or what happened in Vegas and the nightclub and other places, those are high-powered rifles that are going there. So I think it's hard to differentiate sometimes when you're talking about
it. Would you consider implementing cognitive behavioral therapy in the schools in Boston? And I was wondering what your view is on mental illness in terms of being able to have a gun license if someone was to have, like, for example, PTSD. And would that include police officers, people who have fought in wars in this country? You know, my personal opinion is I feel that a lot of times this conversation doesn't want to take place because of a lot of the politicians, not yourself, and you know, the Congress doesn't want to talk about taking guns from those who have fought in wars in the country. But a lot of our mass shootings, they've had military experience. And, you know, I just was wondering your viewpoint.
A lot in that question. I'm going to start with the first part of your comment was about in this year's budget in the City Hall, we're adding 9 clinical psychologists, 8 clinical psychologists and 4 social workers, partly to deal with the situations and struggles that our young people have in our schools, but also partly because of what happened up in Parkland. So what happens is we have a situation, hypothetically, where a young person threatens to shoot people, and I've talked to the superintendent. We need to make sure that we marry that family. We need to make sure the young person gets the help they need. We need to make sure the family, if they need the help, gets the help they need. We can't just bring the person in for a counseling session and say, okay, you're cured. We have to follow that person through, because I don't know the full story, but what happened in Parkland seems like there were signs that this young man had mental illness or had something with him that should have been addressed and should have been followed through, and at some point you hope to get to that point. I'm not a doctor, so when you talk about mental illness and PTSD and putting them in the same categories, I think that's kind of I don't think necessarily PTSD is what some description of mental illness might be. I'm an alcoholic. I stopped drinking 23 years ago. There are certain things that I did when I was drinking that I shouldn't have done. I got sober, and now I can do those things sober. I don't think you could, if somebody's going for help, I don't think you can say, okay, you had PTSD coming, you fought in Afghanistan, you came out of Afghanistan, now you're going to see a counselor, now you have your life together, and the PTSD, you're working with your doctors and stuff. I don't know if that's enough to keep somebody from serving in the police department, serving in the fire department, or even being able to own a handgun. And that's a question I think that I can't answer. So I can't say, yeah, I agree with that. I need to do a lot more research on with doctors and psychologists to let them explain to me what the situation is. Because I think if I sit up here talking about it, I'm a fraud because I'm not a doctor. Yeah.
So I just have a question kind of just about, like, in the political environment, how do you get people kind of on the other side of the issue to come to the table and talk about these gun violence prevention strategies? I'm originally from Texas, so the political environment there is really different than the one here. But I just feel like it's sometimes really hard to get those dialogues going and make sure they're productive.
I think you challenge your elected officials, and you get like-minded people to challenge your elected officials with you, and that means showing up at their office, that means calling their office, that means explaining what's going on. When I was a legislator, if I received, we did, I don't know how many bills, 4,000 bills filed a year. If I got 2 calls on a bill, okay, I got 2 calls. If I got 4 or 5 calls on a bill, I kind of paid attention to that bill. I represented 37,000 to 40,000 people. If I got 10 calls on a bill and letters, I'm like, oh, let's pay attention to this because there's energy out there. And I think that we have to continue putting pressure on elected officials. Elected officials are elected not to support their personal beliefs, but to support their constituency. And I think some of what's happening in America today, I think elected officials have lost sight of that. And they think that they're bigger than the office, and they're not. The office is bigger than them, and they represent people. And I think that the way you bring people back down to life a little bit, or back down to earth, everyone runs, well, most people run with the good intention of wanting to do good. But when they get in there, they get caught up in a system. And I think, honestly, putting pressure on your elected officials by calling and writing and educating, having stories, and eventually you'll get to that person. You will get to that person. And I think that what happened in Parkland started to get to people, but now that some time has gone by, they're starting to go back into their comfort zone again because they think enough time has gone by, because this is just another mass shooting that has gone by, and now we're in the clear sailing until the next one. And I said what I needed to say. Right now, if you're talking about state legislators or congressional leaders, right now is the time to put pressure on them. Because right now, before the nomination papers are due, they're petrified of picking up an opponent in this environment. And if they have an opponent, then you have an opportunity to say, where are you in this? Because I'm going to go across the street to your opponent's office, and I'm going to go help them. And I think that this is the time that you put pressure on Congress and state legislators in these type of elections. You might think that doesn't work. It absolutely works. most people in this room, well, I can't say this room, but I'm just making an assumption. Most people in this room have not called you city councilors, or maybe not this room. Most people in the room across the street have not called their city councilors or their state representatives or the mayor's office for anything. They've never called them, they've never, and the answer is like, oh, I don't want to call them. It's useless, pointless calling them. We're putting 8 additional nurses in the school budget. We're putting 8 additional clinical psychologists in the school budget. We're putting 4 social workers in the school budget. We're doing it for 2 reasons. One is because it's the right thing to do, but 2, there's been an advocacy group for those types of services in our school district. So that you respond to what people are asking for. Now, you can't do everything, but it's important that you reach out and talk. I'm guaranteeing you, most times elected officials don't, and I'm not talking a mass email. Don't even bother. If you're going to email somebody, you can email them, man. Some people do. Email them all day long. You know what email is? You hit delete. Make a phone call, demand a call back, show up at their office, knock on their front door, go to their office hours, make them see the person, not an email that's a form email saying, you know, we don't want violence in Texas and we want you to be in bump stocks and this and that, and everyone puts the same letter in with the name and address of the person there. That becomes noise. Go to their office, knock on their door, demand a meeting, see them face to face, and if not, ask for their chief of staff. And not the person at the front desk. Ask for their chief of staff and let them know how you feel. I can do one more.
Mayor Walsh, thanks for speaking today. We've been talking a lot about violence, and we were reminded earlier that there's some degree of a sense that there is virtuous violence, and that would include state-sponsored violence. It's a problem in this country. Can you make a comment about what you're doing in Boston to try to ensure that especially communities of colour are protected from police violence?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it indirectly in my, first of all, where are you from?
Dublin.
Dublin, okay. I have an aunt in Lucan. I talked about it a little bit in my speech. It's about building community relationships up. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, it's constantly going out there and doing whatever it is we need to do to build trust. Ultimately, I think it comes down to education. Ultimately, it comes down to making sure that every young person that gets into our school system gets a strong start, and is able to be successful. Because many times, when you hear about whether it's a community police interaction with a young person that goes very badly, I'm not talking about what we've seen in the papers and shootings. I'm talking about just where the young person leaves out with a bad taste in their mouth and there's no trust at all, and that trust is gone, and the police have a bad taste in their mouth and that trust is gone. It hurts out. I think ultimately, and we're trying to do this to our educational system, is the way we fix violence in America, the way we fix, and not fix, but the way we continue to deal with racism in America, and the way we continue to deal with income inequality in America, is by making sure that every young person, when they get into school, whatever, regardless of the color of their skin, that they have an opportunity for a pathway when they get to 12th grade to a career or college. And I think we've failed our kids a lot in a lot of ways, because what's happened is our dropouts are high. And when a kid drops out of school, I mean, I wasn't a great student in high school, and I was fortunate enough to have a father that was a union laborer, and I got into the laborers union, so I was able to go to work if I didn't go to college. Not everyone has that opportunity. So when young people drop out of school, they have no place to go, and all they know is hanging on the corner, and inevitably that hanging on the corner could get them into trouble and get them into violent situations. So I think that we have to really, in the city, in the state, I'll just talk for Massachusetts, need to make a larger investment in education, because we're looking long-term, rather than trying to get social service programs to catch the kids that we missed. And we've been doing that now for 50, 60, 70 years in Boston. Let's get in the forefront, and let's cut that number down that we have to get. Let's put the social service companies, social service industry out of business by actually educating kids, and I'm saying that in a positive way. When it comes to community police relations, it really is, there's a whole bunch of things we've done. So when I came in as mayor, the command staff didn't reflect the diversity of our city, so we made the first move to diversify the command staff. 50% of the command staff were people of color. We started to change, Lisa Holmes, our superintendent for training, started to change the way that we train our new officers coming on around racism and around just different interactions with people, rather than arresting everyone, trying to work out solutions. We started a cadet program in the city to diversify the rank and file of our police department, so the rank and file would again reflect the community that they serve. We put into the first Muslim officer of color, first Muslim officer captain in the history of Boston. We put, in the Latino community, majority Latino community, we put a Latino captain. In the Asian community, an Asian captain. And again, it's about understanding that young people that are having interactions when they see police officers or leadership in the police department, that it's somebody that looks like them and can understand and maybe even have similar situations growing up. We've done that. You know, as I said earlier, we're not perfect and we're not where we need to be yet. But I think that when President Obama put together 21st century policing, and he brought in Superintendent Ramsey, Commissioner Ramsey, to lead it. After about the third meeting, when the report came out, 3/4 of the report was basically based off what we're doing in Boston, which we're happy about. But what happens? We lost the momentum because the new leadership changed in Washington. So I think, where does it start? It starts with the mayor, it starts with the city council, and it starts with the police commissioner. And it's important for us to continue to move forward in positive directions and not be afraid to take criticism. Because I go into a lot of rooms where I get a lot of criticism. You know, your police department is racist. Your police department isn't working with us. Your police department isn't helping us, and you just can't you can't take it personal. You got to say, because their experience, that person's experience, has been a bad one. So how do you fix that relationship? I can't do it by saying quick words and trying to move my way through it. You have to say, okay, let's try and work a better solution. And again, we're going to continue to move forward on that. I think demilitarizing the police is important. After Ferguson happened and we had protests here in Boston, Boston Police Department went out there without riot gear. We didn't have all that stuff. We went out, we interacted with the community. The young people that were out here protesting Ferguson, they had some interactions with the state police and they had some interactions with the MBTA police. They had riot gear on. It got people incited. It wasn't the right way to approach, and we didn't use the riot gear. We didn't have that. When we had the free speech rally, the so-called free speech rally on Boston Common, again, we did have some officers in riot gear that day because we were concerned about what was going to happen. We wanted to make sure we had 40,000 people come in to the Boston Common to have a peaceful kind of pushback to this group that was going to have free speech and talk what they want to talk about. We had them prepared just to protect the people, but the officers that were inside the park and the perimeter didn't have the riot gear on. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything other than it's important that you respect people. If you go into a community and you have riot gear, then what you're saying is we need to bring the army into this community because it's unsafe. And it's about how do you pass positive messages and move forward. So I know you have a breakout session. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come. Again, thank you for speaking, all the speakers here today. Thank you for what you said, and thank you for sharing your stories. And I hope that some of the good information that comes out of this we'll be implementing in Boston, and I'll be working on the buyback program for the bullets. Thank you.